can go ahead and hit the other items on the agenda. Bob, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I just have one follow-up on the question about the Severn Trent invoice. One of the things that we found in the invoice was there was a mistake in the August billing. We credited it back to the board in your November, December financials. You'll see those in your next set of financials. That was credited back. The other part of the question on there was about a special billing. We did some special field work, and that was billed to the district as well. And Russ, can you give them some details on?
Yeah, define special field work.
Yeah, Russ, can you tell them what?
All the, either one of them didn't work.
Can you hear me? Okay. That was, when Chuck was here, he did an actual got from the engineer too, a report on the ponds. There was quite a bit of work needed to be done on some of the skimmer boards and some of the control structures. So ringing the bell.
This was associated with the hurricane work?
No, this was prior to.
Is it that, was this tied to the original annual
I think it
engineering
was the
report?
annual inspection, yes.
And
we,
Chuck took care of some of the items himself versus hiring a separate contractor?
correct.
When we say
Think
Chuck
that-
took care of it, it's Severn Trent.
Chuck's the one that started it, initiated it.
But is there any leak?
Yes.
Do we have a report on that?
I didn't, it was just, the question came up on financials, that's why it
Yeah.
was raised. So, that's what it was due to, and I guess it was in the engineer's report. Kathy, can you comment on that? Or Mike?
It was tied to, I believe it was tied to the engineer's report. We would need some kind of indication of what work was actually done, and then we could verify that it was completed. That would be normally, if we had hired a contractor, that's what we normally would have done, was inspected the work after the contractor completed it.
I think we still, we can't approve until we have all this completed.
Yeah.
We need complete information, we need a report.
Okay, we can do that. We've got pictures and all that stuff. Before and after.
January 3rd at 11. January 3rd at 11
Okay,
a.m.
whereabouts?
Here.
Here?
Yep, right after ticket sales.
What?
Right after ticket sales.
Oh, joy. Okay,
Okay.
Lovely.
I'll schedule it.
okay, thank you. Okay, January 3rd at 11 a.m. for the audit committee. Scheduled meeting.
On my calendar.
Yeah, need probably just a motion to go ahead and schedule it.
Okay, a motion to schedule the audit committee meeting for January 3rd, 2018 at 11 a.m. in the
So
boardroom.
moved.
Second?
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carried. Okay. Was there anything else, Mr. Concar?
No, sir, that was it.
Okay. Next item on the agenda are staff reports, the district attorney.
One item we're looking at is just the, you have a dissemination agent reports that need to go out quarterly. We're working with existing district manager and verifying that those were all done and complete, and working with the new manager to make sure that we have the report done. There's a report that's due at the very end of January, and because your transition is scheduled to occur on January 25th, we want to make sure that there's coordination between the managers and making sure that report gets done in a timely manner. So that's one of the things we've been working on, but most of our efforts that aren't related to recreation have been focused on the transition and trying to help facilitate that.
Well, speaking of reports, it's my understanding we're missing 2 reports. Quarterly reports, are they?
My understanding is there's 2 quarterly reports that at least weren't apparent at the time that the new manager looked for them. We brought that to the attention of Mr. Conkar, and I think he was going to be looking into that.
Yeah, we're researching that. I'm not sure they were not done or not submitted, but we're researching that and we'll get back to the board as one of the follow-up items. Also on this report though, that's due in February, we're glad to do the report before we do the transition, because our transition takes place on the 25th. The only problem we might have is if we don't get the information from the developer. If we have all the information, we'll do the report at no additional charge to the district before we do the transition, because it's going to be difficult for the new manager to jump in and try to get that done within the time frame. So we're willing to do that. The only caveat is if we get all the information needed.
Okay, thank you. Just one thing regarding the missing reports. I don't know how the board feels, but as far as I'm concerned, that we will withhold payment on those 2 reports until we find out what the story is. Is that okay?
And that's up to the board on how you want to handle that again, and I want to make sure that you understand, I'm not saying that the
No, I
reports weren't
understand.
done, they're just not showing up
Yeah,
where
we
we
don't know where they
ordinarily
are.
see them.
So until
So,
we
yeah.
find out the
Yeah.
details.
I agree, we should hold back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the question is there an implication for us if the reports are done?
Yeah, if they were never done, which again, I don't know if that's the case, there would need to be a notice of failure to file a report that would get sent to the bond repository. Then you'd have to do the report and follow up with it. You know, the implication is that you have an agreement that you're going to make sure that you help facilitate these quarterly reports, and you didn't. So it is something that could come up if you ever went to go refinance your bonds a second time. You'd have to kind of explain, you know, what happened.
We should detail it, if it turns out they were not done, we should detail the reason for the failure and the fact that we changed management or something to that effect. And we should have that in our records.
Well, let me understand, one of them was missing, is the March quarterly report.
Yeah.
March. Okay, that's before district management turnover. And the other one is September.
No, I'm saying, I understand, but if there are missing, to protect our own situation with the bondholders,
Yes.
we need to have them detail how reports
I
are
agree,
missing.
but I'm just saying,
And
I
have to
don't
change
think it was-
management companies to
I-
avoid it again.
Yeah, I think when we do we need to figure out the facts first, okay?
Yeah.
And then once we do that, I understand what your point is to kind of have an explanation as to why it wasn't done, and we'll work with your managers to try to come up with something there. And it's not unheard of that this happens, but it's something that was noticed and that we need to be on top of.
Yeah, you always need to have a record of that, so you can pull back on it.
Okay, but until we satisfy that, there's going to be no payment on those 2 reports until we satisfy that issue.
Right.
Okay. All right. Is that it, Mr. Eckert?
Yeah, I don't know what the payment issue, I don't know if that's already been paid or not, so we're gonna have to look at that, and I've asked Bob to, work with me in terms of making sure prorations are correct, and that would be one of the things I think that would fall in there in terms of, you know, their last invoice. But I don't have the information to be able to say whether or not we need to go down that road or not.
All right.
No further report unless the board has questions.
Okay, moving on, next item on the agenda, the engineer's report.
Good morning. I have 2 updates for you, board. First is on all of the ponds. I did receive a request from the chairman to provide an updated list of the ponds. We do have a map, an updated list from January, which I can distribute over the next week or so. And then we are also in the process of confirming there may be one additional pond that was added through this year that will need to be added to that, which we can update probably early January once we've confirmed that.
Is that Treviso area?
I don't have the exact pond number in front of me right
What
now.
do you mean by added this year? Because we've already budgeted for pond treatments. And we said that unless we get them ahead of time, we weren't going to accept them.
I believe there was one that was added in the minutes going back, or at one of the meetings going back in June, is I think when it was added.
Yeah, and we've worked a little bit because we just received an additional request from AB on some ponds. And we're working with Michael and the district engineer and making sure that We understand that we're already taking care of them, because what's happened a lot of times is the pond is platted and it's dedicated to the CDD on the plat, and then there's a follow-up deed that comes a little bit later on. And so once it's platted, we can start maintaining it, maintaining that pond, and the deed comes up later. So the fact that I'm seeing a deed now, I know you guys adopted a resolution in 2016 on one of these accepting the responsibilities for it. So it's already in our maintenance program. However, I am very clear on the board's policy that we're not going to accept ponds mid-year and pay for the maintenance of them. So anything that's mid-year, we should be talking to the developer about. You either wait till the year's over, or you're going to have to kick in a little bit if our maintenance costs go up, because we just couldn't budget it because you didn't tell us in time. So that's on our radar in terms of making sure we're not put in that situation where we have an unbudgeted liability for pond maintenance as a result of the timing of the transition.
And to follow up on that, we've requested a full list and the actual contracts from your manager to make sure that we can go through and find out exactly which ponds are covered under the various contracts, to make sure that we don't do that exact issue of potentially accept ponds. So that was the other half of the pond update. So over the next few weeks, one, you'll get the most current map, and then you'll potentially get an updated map, but it may not need to be updated depending on the results of that, and what we figure out with that. The second item is on the aerator. We are coordinating the easement with the golf course. They are open to granting an easement. We are also obtaining pricing. I'm working with Russ to obtain pricing on the electric. As of right now, it looks like the electric is coming back quite a bit more expensive than what we expected. And the reason for that is the distance that we anticipated to have to go is about twice as much as what we initially thought. And it includes a potential bore. All of the options include some kind of a bore, either under a driveway or under the road. We've done some preliminary looking at some of the other ponds that have been mentioned, and it looks like it may be a fairly consistent theme that are going to be difficult to get electric to them. So before we can, advise on whether or not the budget's going to need to be bumped, we need to get those quotes back and make sure we're looking at a real number versus a guesstimate.
So you're not sure that it's below where we?
I'm almost certain it's going to be over the 22. I just don't know by how much, and so I'm not comfortable telling the board to bump that number or recommend anything on that at this time. We should be able to come back with information at the next meeting to make a recommendation.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Are there any other items?
That's all for me, so unless there's any questions.
Okay, there being none, moving on to the next item, our field manager's report. A couple of things. First of all, I have a problem with the eye test on this.
I do too.
This report is, definitely needs help. Needs help, needs work. It doesn't say anything. For example, the very first item on that list of, I guess it's complaints or whatever, it says overflow is sinking severely.
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
And I would like a description of what that means. And then it says Allen repaired. Well, what was the repair?
Alan repaired the skimmer boards. You gotta remember, sometimes this is how the calls come in from the resident.
Well, then, for a report, it doesn't do the board any good to just have that kind of a comment, then it has to be audited or edited by yourself or somebody else. It doesn't mean anything to us. And if we need pictures, then we need pictures for it.
Exactly.
Okay, and they should be put in the report.
Yes, if this was a skimmer board, we would have to know that it was a skimmer, and et cetera. I mean, it should be some detail.
And the other item I had down is that somebody wants a CDD trees at the pond removed, and it says pending. Well, that's a board decision. I haven't seen anything come forward to the board that says so-and-so is requesting trees to be removed. That's not an unilateral decision, that's a board decision on vegetation removal, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't seen anything about that.
I believe we requested them to come to the meeting. You're speaking to the motion. I'm sorry.
I believe we requested them to come to the meeting to talk to the board.
Okay, again, we're gonna need pictures and stuff like that, to make a determination. Or else it'll be a field trip for the board.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a name of a person, all I see is an address, and we don't know anything. We don't know who to contact or anything.
So, bottom line is that I think the report needs some detail and some work and not be an eye test. Anything else on this report? No?
It's got to be enlarged. Well, besides being enlarged, no, it needs to be much more detailed.
Anything else for Russ? No? No. How about the floral lawn report? And that's something I have. As you can see in the floral lawn report, there's a pond report. And I don't know where this list of ponds came from, but I know Lake Polk and Lake B are not CDD ponds. So floral lawn needs to be educated on who owns what ponds. Because this kind of report is useless, okay? Doesn't say anything again. And if floral lawn was here, I tell them directly that this is meaningless.
We need to be sure they're at the next meeting.
Yeah. Well, that's what prompted my request for a pond list, Michael.
Would you prefer him to be at the joint meeting? Probably.
No.
No?
Why would they-
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I think we need to start talking about ponds separately.
Ponds are, as far as the CDD are concerned, the joint meeting has to do with the amenities. So we don't want to mix the two up.
And it says here, we edged around tree ring, cut around structure of ponds. You know. I believe somewhere in the contract, they're supposed to remove a lot of suckers or something from trees around the pond. That's not happening. I can show you trees in my backyard around the pond. They got stuff growing up from the ground, they got stuff growing out from the bottom of the tree. They're not doing any trimming at all on those.
Did you ever report it?
Yes. Okay. Any other questions about the floor lawn report? How about the clock report? How about that? No questions or comments on the clock report? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Next item on the agenda. Which I lost. Supervisor comments, sorry. Do we have any supervisor comments?
Not now?
Okay. And the next item on the agenda is audience comments.
A bit out of Tom too. I'm Larry Bennett, 105 Auburn Drive. A couple of meetings ago, when y'all were considering the budget, there was some comments or some reference in there that alluded to the fact that there were engineering costs and perhaps some others that were associated with the amenities. And I haven't seen any amendment or any deletion of that comment in the financial information. Maybe I've overlooked it. Mike, I think you were going to look into that and make sure that there were no expenses associated with the amenities that appeared in the budget for the pond CDD.
Yeah, and that was one of the things, actually, the district manager was going to go back and look through, because they're very finite items, and in fact, in the check register that's presented here, several of them that were noted as developer funded, so they did notate those on this particular one. In terms of going back, that's something that the manager has the records and absolutely should do to make sure, because there's also some construction-related invoices that come in that we have a completion agreement with the developer that they're still responsible for from agreements that date pretty far back.
And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we didn't want to approve the financials, because we don't have the detail yet to do so.
So that's the current manager, Severin Trent,
Yes.
et cetera, and that's forthcoming. Check.
It's on his action item. we expect to see a completion. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Any other audience comments? Okay, being none, moving on to the next item on the agenda, our adjournment.
So moved?
Second?
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Meeting adjourned.